Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness, your home for gains and brains, and one of the best ways to inhibit your gains is always being hurt. And this doesn't even have to be a major injury. It's often going to be something that is minor, but lingering. It never really goes away. You have flare-ups, then it kind of calms down, then it keeps coming back. It's like a fly you're always trying to swat, but you just can't get rid of it. These type of things are going to drive you crazy, and a lot of people, unfortunately, they don't really know how to take care of them beyond some things on the surface. They fail to get to the root of the problem. And of course, the shoulders are notorious for fitting this criteria. So we have a lot to cover here, and toward the end of the video too, I'm going to share something that a lot of people get wrong. I used to as well, a common form cue that may actually be making your shoulder issues worse, even though you've been told that it should make them better. So the first questions we have to ask are, 1, how did you get here? And 2, what is the severity of your problem? Oftentimes, people will do things in their normal life that they might not be directly causing the shoulder issues, but they are probably contributing. Some examples of this might include if you always carry a heavy bag over one shoulder, such as a backpack, and over time, your shoulder on that side starts to hike up. That can start to throw things off as well. You may be stronger on that side, and that leads to the compensation when you're training. This also can happen through repetitive movements. Maybe you work in construction or some other type of job where you are using one arm much more than the other. Even something like golfing or tennis, some type of athletic activity like that, even on a recreational basis, that can lead to imbalances too. These are not terribly hard to fix if you dedicate the time to them. In the case of carrying bags, you can simply switch between arms every so often. When it comes to things like athletics or a job, you're probably not going to be really switching to your weaker side. That's not going to be advantageous to your performance. That said, you can still address the weaker side when you're training. You can do, say, a little bit more volume to catch it up. You can do, if you want to call it, pre-exhaust on the weaker side before you hit the other side. Maybe focus on unilateral exercises for a period of time. Unilateral exercises are not going to outright fix these problems and imbalances, but they can definitely show you in a tangible fashion how bad they might be. Now, on the more serious end are legitimate injuries. Some of these may be in the gym, others may be outside of it, but if you have had shoulder surgery or major operations done, this is going to be more of a headache. So in those type of instances, you may be best suited to outright avoid certain exercises. You can obviously make adjustments to the form and use different equipment. We'll talk about that coming up shortly, but sometimes it's not worth the risk at all. So the two most common problem areas here are going to be the AC joint and the rotator cuff. And there are a lot of preventative prehab style things that people with such injuries will like to do. Oftentimes they're going to involve resistance bands, and you may see people do something like this in the gym. They will grab light dumbbells and just sort of swing them side to side like they're almost doing the abductor machine, and they really put no thought into it, and they just kind of do that and say, okay, I warmed up my shoulders. If you have no major shoulder problems, I guess that's going to be fine. But if you do have legitimate issues there, you're going to want a much more focused and organized warm-up routine. So in a standard gym, you can find a cable station and use light weights when doing these type of things, such as shoulder extension and rotation. I'm going to link down below to an article I found from a site called E3 Rehab. He does a fantastic job breaking everything down there. I do think, though, that having at least one resistance band, maybe a set of them, of varying capacities, maybe longer and shorter as well, is going to be better because, one, they're your own bands, you never have to wait for them, and you can do the banded stuff at home too, pretty much every day. Some people, they will tend to only do these prehab rehab type of things, maybe on their training days, and oftentimes they'll still forget to do that, or they'll gradually start to fall off of the habit. Doing just a little bit each day is much better than trying to do a bunch of stuff only one time a week. So aside from resistance bands, you want to also look for something like a PVC pipe or a broomstick. You can also look into lacrosse balls or tennis balls to kind of dig into those areas. Foam rollers are going to be helpful there as well, but nothing is going to really dig down deep into your muscle tissues quite like a massage. And thankfully now, we can get a high quality massage from the comfort of home with a massage gun. And without question, my favorite is the Bob and Brad D6, and it is best known for its industry-leading 85 pounds of stall force. And to put this stall force to the test, I first tried the D6 on my hardwood floor, and you can see this from the camera itself. It did not stall. It sounded like there was construction happening in my apartment. I then tried it on this wooden chair as well. Even putting my full force onto the D6, it still is kicking like a mule here. And I even tried it on this humble little plyometric box, and it is doing the same thing. So if it is going to kick these inanimate objects around this hard, imagine what it can do for your muscles. The D6 has become a cornerstone of my regimen. I like to use this at least one time a week for even 10 to 15 minutes, and I put this thing to the test on all parts of the body, going from the smaller areas down to the biggest ones in the lower body, and this gun is unstoppable. It provides the impact that you would get from an in-person massage therapist, and on the highest setting, I would say that it's more intense than any that I've ever been to. This gun packs a punch. You're probably going to be wincing, like you can see me doing here, but ultimately it's a matter of hurting so good, and you're going to feel the benefits in the days after. Even when it comes to the low back and the spinal erectors, which are relatively immobile muscles, but they are very dense, the D6 does not stall. Then hit the glutes, the quads, the hamstrings, and don't forget the calves at the end, because if you've never gotten a deep tissue massage on your calves before, it is something you're probably not fully ready to experience, but you should, because you are very tight down there, as most of us are, and you're gonna feel it. The D6 is a fantastic tool for recovery and relaxation. It's easily portable, and it's got the best stall force on the market. So if you would like to give it a try, click the link down below and use code BOB&BRAD6 in all caps on the Amazon checkout page. You're going to get 10% off of your order. So before we go into training mechanics, we need to talk briefly about preventative measures. People tend to have a very narrow scope when it comes to these issues. You also want to focus on, though, the surrounding musculature that is going to support the shoulders. And this is one of the biggest issues that a lot of guys run into, because the typical gym bro, and this goes from age 16 up to 66, they are far more concerned with the mirror muscles. Most dudes are going to do back training to some extent. They'll do pull-ups, lat pull-downs, some type of row, but oftentimes you can just look at their physique and tell the back does not match the front. You turn these guys to the side, as I call it, Ticonderoga pencil syndrome. They don't have built-up traps or rear delts, so it's not really hard to throw in some rows. It doesn't really matter exactly what type you're doing to hit the mid-traps. But in terms of the rear delts, you may benefit from some form of isolation for those if they don't really grow on par with the rest of the back, or if you are experiencing some shoulder pain, assuming that your form is good. That's another thing we're going to talk about too. But rear delts can be hit with something like a reverse pec deck, reverse fly, reverse raise, stuff that is really, really minimally fatiguing, doesn't take too long. It's pretty easy to just toss into the routine. The bigger that your back is, the more support inherently you have for the shoulders, especially when pressing. So the biggest form flaw a lot of people have when pressing is that they flare their elbows. What that essentially means is they are going to be almost 90 degrees to the side of the body, essentially perpendicular, and the elbows are not going to be angled in really at all. Now, something to keep in mind with this, it is possible to have what looks like flared elbows, even if you are not internally rotating, because people commonly will say that those are the same thing. So use me for example. I am slightly above average height. I've got long arms for my frame. A lot of people watching fit this same criteria. It's a very common build. You are not going to be able to press a bar all the way down to your chest, oftentimes even dumbbells all the way down to your chest, without some degree of elbow flare. But that does not mean that you are internally rotating the shoulder. Given your bone structure, there is just no other way to get a full range of motion without this happening. So this is an old clip of me doing dumbbell bench press. And what people commonly say when they see this is that I am flaring my elbows and it's going to damage my shoulders. If I am using the standard grip, this is inevitable. There is no way to make this look more cosmetically pleasing, so while this may look dangerous on the surface, especially when you see these tutorial videos made by very short guys or illustrations that can make everything look perfect, This is the real world, but you can avoid the internal rotation problem very easily with some degree of elbow tuck. My elbows are tucked in slightly here, even if you can't really tell. And the elbow tuck really just means that you are going to have your elbows angled inward, and that your wrists are going to be directly on top of them vertically, or maybe a bit behind them when you are pressing. If you want to use dumbbells, you can make this even more noticeable. You can take an angled grip. Oftentimes the dumbbells are going to be facing at 45 degrees going into each other as they press up. You could even take a neutral grip if you would like to. That is a very common solution for shoulder pain. Most guys, if they go to a neutral grip, whether it's with dumbbells or even with something like a Swiss bar or angled grip bar, that shoulder pain is going to be alleviated largely, if not entirely. This is one of the interesting things when it comes to the grip selection, because close and more medium grip usually are okay for the shoulders. If you have major problems, you may have to always go closer grip. But when it comes to pressing, the most advantageous angle possible is going to be the wrist stacked over the elbows. Now that said, that is going to be for a lot of longer-armed lifters a wide grip. You'll have to do so in order to achieve that. But for a lot of guys, the wide grip is the most stressful on the shoulders. So now you're in a pickle. You can see me here bench pressing. This is a pretty classical medium grip, and I still have that elbow flare effect we just talked about. Now, I don't have major shoulder problems, so this is okay with me when I switch to the wider grip, I would call it, that is pinkies on the rings of a typical power bar. But if you've got major shoulder problems, pinkies on the rings, let alone beyond that, may not be feasible for you. So I think aiming for a general medium grip is a good idea, at least to start, while you're adjusting. You want to ideally get your shoulder health in a position too to where you can take a wider grip to totally get that elbow and wrist stacking, but it may take some time to get there. However you do it though, I would aim for that to be your long-term goal. If you simply cannot do that, I would aim for a medium grip, however you can do so comfortably. But if the typical barbell, bench press, incline press, overhead press are always giving you problems, you're probably better suited to just find something else to do. I think the roughly 45-degree angle grip, whether you get that via dumbbells or a Swiss bar, I think that's the best of both worlds. For almost all shoulder pain cases, it's going to be much more manageable, and your pain may totally go away with that type of grip. Now that said, the next big thing we need to talk about here is the arm angle itself. So I just alluded to, you want to have the wrist stacked over the elbow whenever you're pressing, and I came across this video coincidentally from John Meadows. I'll let him illustrate this point.
When you start with presses with the bar out in front of you, if you start from a little better position like here instead of here, I feel like that's a little more shoulder friendly. And even if you can get up to here, like this angle here, doesn't tend to beat your shoulders up. You can get away with it.
And that right there is something I see all the time. Whether it is with client footage, just watching people train in the gym, or even if I record myself on certain exercises, when you've got longer arms, even average length arms for a lot of people, you are going to have this exact problem. The wrists are going to drift in front of the elbows, and that throws off the entire pressing angle. This is going to be more likely to induce stress and pain and potential injury because the position is so disadvantaged and the support musculature cannot fully be engaged. And this really is tough to deal with when it comes to shoulder pressing. I have noticed the trend of around roughly 115 pounds to maybe 135 pounds for a few reps. Guys there will commonly start to get some noticeable discomfort or pain when overhead pressing. Some guys can get away with that, and their shoulders are going to be fine. I haven't done the exercise regularly in a while at this point for this reason. Once I got to the point that I was pressing 135 for, I want to say 8 reps or so, this was a couple years ago, it was an effective exercise for sure. I don't think anybody's saying that it's not. But the shoulder stress that came with it, it just became not worth the trade-off. You might be able to overhead press fine for a long time, even getting very strong at it, no problems. Other guys like me, you're gonna run into so many headaches with it, because getting all the way down, even if you're not doing the full range of motion, just getting down to even the nose or the chin, there is almost no way to prevent that angle, the wrist going in front of the elbows. Unless you are leaning back very heavily, like Starting Strength now I think teaches their presses that way, You can accommodate for that if you want to keep leaning back more and more, but a lot of guys aren't going to want to do that, one, because of the potential back pain, and two, it kind of turns into a cheat rep in a way when you really get that standing incline going. So once again, the more you can angle your elbows inward here, most likely that's going to be with dumbbells, the more you can alleviate this problem. But even so, a lot of guys, when they do their overhead pressing, even if it's seated, they can still have this problem because they tend to sit with the back pad at 90 degrees. And if you want to sit very upright, unless you have little T-Rex arms, you are going to have the same problem once again. So if you're going to do a shoulder press with, say, dumbbells, for example, even if you're going to do a seated military press with a barbell, I think it's a better idea to have the bench at roughly 75 degrees rather than 90. This machine here, for example, is very common in gyms, and I see people every single week have this arm angle problem on it. If you're always encountering some type of problems, you could realistically just train your front delts with lighter things like front raises. That's usually going to minimize or totally eliminate the pain, and you're going to get a similar stimulus. You're not going to be getting that kind of compound movement effect. You're not going to be hitting the triceps at the same time or building the sheer strength. That said, if you're training your chest otherwise with typical incline pressing and flat pressing, most guys, I think, are going to be fine in terms of their front delt development. And that brings us to the last topic here, and it is easily overlooked, but it's very important. So most people, when they start training, whenever they press, they just flop down on the bench, and their arms are waving and flailing around, and that's not going to be good for the shoulders. You may experience your first bout of shoulder pain, you look up how to do this properly, and then you learn about scapular retraction, which is basically squeezing your shoulder blades together and then pulling them down. And I used to adhere to that all the time on pressing. I would even walk around campus in college retracting my scapula with my backpack on, because I was always so worried, okay, I need to have this down pat, I need to always do this. I was very scared of internal rotation and just letting my shoulders even slouch a little bit, even if not lifting weights, so I was constantly just pulling and squeezing my back together all during the day. Not to be confused with my intro chest up, shoulders back. I do not tell you in that to actually retract your scapula. I just say to make some simple posture adjustments. But that disparity there is actually very key, because if you constantly do your pressing with a retracted scapula, what you're actually going to do, even if it's well-intentioned, you will end up inhibiting the surrounding musculature in the pressing. That includes some muscles of the shoulder, the upper back, and especially the serratus. You're actually going to inhibit the full movement of the scapulae and the shoulder blades. And that oftentimes is what results in something like this: scapular winging. If you've ever taken a progress picture or video and one side of your back is poking out, and it almost looks like one of those elevated maps of a country, like you see the mountain range. What's really happening is that your shoulder blade has lost its full contact with the rib cage, and it essentially comes off. And not only does this look gross, it is going to negatively impact your performance. Now, thankfully, you can of course fix this as well. I have done it in the past. Plenty of people have too. I will also link down below an article that goes over many scapular retraction rehab exercises, but you need to keep that in mind, especially if you're a younger lifter. You're commonly going to be told, because this is basically gospel in the lifting scene, retract your scapula anytime you press. And that is well-intentioned, and I really understand it, but that can definitely have its negative side effects, and if it's overdone, it's really going to have the opposite effect of what you intended. That's only going to make shoulder pain worse. So instead of thinking about retracting your scapula, which is pulling your shoulder blades back and then kind of pressing them down, think about scapular depression. What that really means is that you're going to depress your shoulders down, but you're not going to squeeze them together and really contract the middle of your back. This may sound subtle, but I'll put up a graphic on the screen. I think illustrates it pretty well. You can see the woman, whenever she is retracting her scapula, how her back is more cinched up, and then whenever she is merely depressing her scapula, her back is wider, it doesn't have that kind of cinched up effect in the middle. That is going to provide more movement freedom. So when you depress your scapula down, you're going to set in your lats, you're going to provide that stable base, but you're not going to get those same negative side effects of inhibiting the surrounding muscles. But this has been it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. Be sure to grab your program and the nutrition guide, Body Composition Bible, down below. learn how to train and eat, the best way to get in direct contact with me is on Patreon, and you get lifetime access to our community Discord server there as well. And I will catch you guys next time.